Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Gaja Zornada. I am going to talk about the preservation of creative software distribution and grassroots publishing practices. Why? Because that's something that we are currently dealing with in terms of dealing with the intangible heritage of our digital age. Our museum is celebrating its 20-year anniversary this year. It got started as a student initiative in 2004 when everybody was much younger and didn't have so much gray hair. And in those 20 years, we've been spending most of our time raising digital heritage awareness. We are an NGO with an authorized status in the public interest. One given by the Ministry for Digital Transformation in the segment of developing informational society, and the other one given by the Ministry of Culture in the protection of cultural heritage. We also employ government-accredited museum specialists, are members of the International Museum Council, ICOM-CIMUSIT, so the International Committee for Museums and Collections of Science and Technology, and we're huge ambassadors of software heritage. We're also very engaged in research. So yesterday, GRADE was mentioned, the Grassroots Digital Europe, and today Maria Garda was mentioned just now by Nicholas, who is leading this whole initiative. I, together with Mirek, am co-leading a working group that focuses on digital grassroots as European cultural heritage. So if anybody wants to know more about this particular research group, which is a pan-European research group dealing with a lot of interesting things alongside games, but also games, please come up to me or find me on Discord. So this is our museum building. We just recently acquired one of the more prominent industrial design items that kind of bring us back into the 60s and 70s, which is the kiosk in front of it, where we showcase computer magazines. But what we really do is research, document, preserve, and show both tangible and intangible heritage of certain socio-economic moments in computing history. Focusing today, the presentation is going to be on grassroots initiatives. So a little bit of history lesson to take you back. Slovenia was part of the Yugoslavia, so the northern tip marked with a star, and Yugoslavia was the original non-aligned. In '84, Yugoslavia had this huge dispute with Soviet Union, and basically in '56 decided to partner up with India and Egypt to start the idea of a non-aligned movement, so neither the Western or the Eastern axis. The movement itself got formalized in '63 in Belgrade, but '56 was when Tito, Netanyahu, and Nehru were signing the first declaration. When the European Economic Community was established in '57, Yugoslavia was in really good relations, in trade relations and in really good political relations, even though it stayed a non-member, and basically Slovenia joined after regaining independence in 1991. So throughout this time, we were not behind the Iron Curtain. We had access to Western technology, we had access to US technology, which was widely redistributed and repurposed within our own computer products by Iskra Delta. DSC, CDC, IBM, Westinghouse, they were all hugely present. Not only did we get technology in on the information technology segment, but also for infrastructure, for powerhouses. So we were far from being economically remote from the West. But we did have this huge thing for protecting domestic production. So what happened was that, of course, we stimulated local knowledge with the World War II planned economy that favored state-financed technology development. And this whole rebuild effort, pouring resources into domestic production, was still underfunded, so our domestic production kind of lagged one step behind. It had this distribution policy of state-funded organizations getting the technology first, so basically domestic computer production was not accessible to wider public. In the upper image, you see one of the most massively produced Slovene computers. It is the Iskra Delta Partner, intended for offices, but also made it to schools, so we were able to get ourselves a couple of those with some interesting games that children developed during class when they were bored. And the lower one is the most famous living computer, named after our highest mountain, the Triglav computer. It was internationally acclaimed for its industrial design, hence also made it onto a stamp. So because home computers were not available, we needed to limit the import in order to stimulate domestic production. Illegal import of home computers was a big thing. When they did make it to our market, they were unreasonably expected. So like in most of the Eastern countries, they ended up being smuggled on the backseat of a family wagon, under a parka with a sleeping child on it, or in similar other modes. A few of the people you knew in the community actually had access to the computer. And what I have here is a bit of an interview with one of the expat scientists from the States, actually suggesting in the time when import restrictions were very, very strict, that we should drop all import restrictions for 3 years in order to catch up with the West, which was completely unheard of and generally frowned upon. But that was the state of society. So as a result, we came to build a collection that differs a lot from a historic collection in the West. Original software is a scarcity. We have tons of pirated editions, loads of homebrew software, and of course we focus a lot on the remnants of social distribution practices. What you see here in this picture is a list of programs on tapes. It is a booklet, and it is part of a pirate's business ledger. One of the more famous Slovene pirates, Jure Longica, had a very meticulous business operation, and basically we have a ledger tracking all of the sales, prices, items, etc. This person is going to be important for the rest of the story. That's why I'm showing you this. Pirates, I call them mainstream software distribution channel, or were they? Copied software was really abundant because original software was kind of tied to the restricted hardware, therefore, similar restrictions. Copies were the norm, and the pro pirates, so the ones who actually made good money from it, were young people up to 25 years of age. They had a very interesting code of conduct, social code of conduct, that we are also exploring, but one of the items that I listed was, in order to join a pirate collective, you basically needed to contribute one original piece of software that you acquired in whichever way to the collective used for copying and distribution. And this is just a segment of our vast collection of pirated software on tapes. So pirates operated through catalog sales, flea markets, trading against each other, and were a huge economic force. Which brought us to counter-piracy action that was completely grassroots. So quoting people from our oral histories work, politicians only talked about entering the new bright digital era, but did too little to enable wide access to digital tools and literacy, so something had to be done. And pirates were getting too strong too quickly, holding back domestic grassroots software production, because there was no real business case in it. If everything got pirated, they won. So a counter-establishment independent radio station, Radio Student, decided to intervene. The spectrum adoption was big in Slovenia, so sorry, Commodore fans, that came as a second. And Radio Student started to distribute, to broadcast software over the radio waves in 1984 and went through all the way to 1986, late 1986. When public demand withered for that. They played about 1 hour of software before and after radio programming each day. Sometimes on good days they also had like 4 slots for software, but machine readable sounds were 1 hour before the program started and at the end. Which means what? Which means we have a ton of testimonials of people running home from school to be able to record their games. and a ton of testimonials of slightly older people at that time, staying up really late, like after midnight, to record their own games. The recordings were, for those of you who remember cassettes, were, were hit or miss. Sometimes it didn't record well, and you basically needed to go to that colleague of yours that had the right equipment to be able to test the game. There were also, at a certain good period in '85, they were publishing the list of programs that they will be transmitting in newspapers and kind of like those magazines that have TV programming and radio programming. Which prompted this group of young rebellious people at Radio Student to kind of widen their ambitions, and they went from broadcasting bootleg software that we saw in Jure Longika's collection. He was one of the biggest contributors of software for that mission, to establishing themselves as a publishing house. Radio Student, you see at the top right-hand corner of the magazine cover, Moj Mikro, and Telex on the other hand, on the left-hand side was the established magazine producer, combined forces to bring forward trove of publishing. So on the one hand side, they made one of the best distributed computer magazines at the time, and on the other hand side, they partnered with established other publishers to be able to distribute domestic software as originally published software, which before that was not being done. This is the first cassette tape, basically just the inlay of it, published by Radio Student on June 6th, 1984. It cost 700 dinars. This is a time of really rampant inflation. But basically the cassette had Slovene homebrew software. The first in Stran A, so side A, was Contraband. Very important for our story. This is a graphic text adventure that we have also been working very intensely to preserve. Now, our preservation efforts focus both on tangible and the intangible. So we work with, obviously, data carriers, so media. We work with all of the collateral from the creative process to the social exchange, computer magazines, which are a great source of information, and the intangible, where software or histories and practices are kind of equally important. Now, in our museum work, we distinguish 7 different steps of, or let's say degrees of software salvation. Sometimes because we work with things going back into the 60s and 70s, we only have proof of existence. Either somebody who gives us oral history, or it has been mentioned in a scientific article or a magazine. Step 2, we're really lucky when we get documented input and output protocols. Step 3, this is where we start to get giddy, we get binary files. But then again, step 4, we realize that without the data, the binary is not worth much. Ideally, we get the source code, so where we could still track down either admins or actual authors. This is what we're going for, and the bonus is the original hardware that this software was associated with. The extra bonus, the actual original hardware on which a certain piece of software was built, run, or used with a story. Why? Because our ultimate goal as a museum is to give people the opportunity to interact with a live reconstruction. So, Contraband, that I mentioned before, we did a case of museum interpretation through holistic reconstruction this year. Why? Because we were wondering, how are we going to explain everything that was happening in the 80s to generations today, but also generations tomorrow? 4 decades ago, things were vastly different, and it is really hard for somebody who hasn't got the slightest knowledge of how things worked back then to really understand the meaning of a certain piece of software and a certain practice related to that certain piece of software, if we try to explain it in today's, with today's materials. And we're also, always looking out to prepare the terrain for future historians, so they'll have an easier job than we will. So our goal is original software on original hardware done the original way. So we aired the Contraband game, like it's 1984. This happened on May 8th when Radio Student was celebrating its 55th anniversary, and we were kind of partying on our 20th all year long. I would love to say it was broadcast from the original studio, but the original studio was in the basement of the same building. Now they're on the 7th floor of the same building, so I'm kind of calling it the original location. Turning off contemporary broadcast software, basically, to make room for retro tech, and running the software directly from tape, on air, for people to record. Of course, this was accompanied by an event at the museum where we had the radio with the cassette recording device and the spectrums laid out, and we played the game, and before that we had a discussion with the authors, and we talked for an hour about the times and the creation and everything. But most importantly, we also made sure people from other countries were able to access this and have fun alongside of us. It was a huge success. We got a lot of international coverage, and it was also, and this is very important, a huge learning curve for everybody involved. So most of the people present and working at the event, except for the authors of the game, have not really been, let's say, digitally active in '84. I myself was 2 years old. So this was a learning curve for us. And it was amazing to see how, you know, the first 3 blips of the machine recorded sound for the older generation were like a very intense, oh, I think this is an error, and everybody else was clueless. So there's all this vicarious knowledge that unless we try to do reconstructions, unless we try to bring the practices alive again, might escape us, might not be as easily accessible as we would love it to be. So yeah, Contraband 2 was aired in May. Why 2? Why not 1? Because 1 is a really tedious text adventure game. Really, really tedious. This one has snazzy graphics that they've had abundant amount of time to do because so Giga Turk was just out of college and into a fresh job that wasn't too demanding, but Mateusz Kmet was doing his military duty, so he had time galore to play around with the visuals. What else do we do? Of course, we organize retro games events that are thematic, but we also try to reconstruct other practices, which is the retro game buy, sell, trade event. This is our annual museum night in June, and it is us keeping the private collector communities close, but also keeping the tradition of selling second-hand home computer software alive. Because, believe it or not, to today's students, that is a very wild thing. Like, you were selling software on what? And it was second-hand? It is unbelievable, but yeah. What's next? We are actually contemplating pirates as historic personalities, so like other museums reconstruct other events or personalities by enactment. We have a couple of figures that are pretty juicy and we would love to reenact them. I have learned that broadcasting software was not a Slovene-only, Yugoslav-only phenomena, as I've initially led myself to believe. And I am extending my research into this topic to cover more of Europe. So I would love, 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 love to hear from all of you and all of your local practices to be able to compare the actual state of affairs in a certain European country, the origination of the software distribution via broadcasting practice, whether it was grassroots or top-down. Some of you have mentioned national broadcasters, and the reception of this distribution practice on the other side. So please contact me. Let's work together and let's figure out how pan-European this phenomena was. Was it a thing that is really marking the 80s and that helped shape our free spirit, or was it just a blip on the timeline that we can all forget? So thank you, and do come visit.